The air over the Pacific shimmered with heat. Beneath a pale sun, a single aircraft idled on a coral runway, its propellers slicing the silence into even breaths. The waves broke softly beyond the palm line. But inside the hangar, the sound was sharper. The click of metal, the rattle of spent casings, the quiet muttering of men who had long stopped hoping for rest. It was 1943, a Marine Corps airstrip carved from an island barely big enough for dreams. Here, aircraft were not just machines. They were lifelines, extensions of the men who flew them into skies ruled by zeros. Every flight meant survival measured in seconds. Every bullet carried the weight of a life. Among the scattered tools and oil drums stood a single pilot, sleeves rolled, eyes narrowed with the kind of calm that comes from exhaustion, not peace. His plane, an aging F-4F Wildcat, had seen too much. Its body bore the scars of last week's sortie. Its guns jammed too often. Its speed no longer enough. He didn't speak much, but that day he began something different. He looked at the weapon mounts, the belts of ammunition, and wondered, what if this old machine could breathe harder, strike faster? What if its guns could fire, not as they were designed to, but as they needed to? The smell of fuel mixed with salt. A wrench clinked against steel, and with that sound began one of the most reckless and ingenious modifications of the war. A single Marine's defiance against limitation, and the strange calm that comes when death feels near, but duty remains louder. A question lingers even now. How could one man's desperate idea make a machine kill 20 enemies per minute? The war in the Pacific had become a test of endurance. Every mile of ocean, every island, every dawn carried the same echo. The rising hum of engines, the distant thud of guns, and the silent weight of men who knew their lives depended on the tools they held. The U.S. Marines fought not from comfort, but from coral, mud, and steel. Their aircraft, the Grumman F-4F Wildcat, was tough, reliable, but by 1943, it was already falling behind. Against Japan's agile A6M0, the Wildcat struggled. It couldn't climb as fast. It couldn't turn as sharp. And its guns, though dependable, often jammed in battle, a pause that could turn survival into silence. Pilots were aware of every flaw, mechanics even more so. On those humid island bases, Guadalcanal, Henderson Field, Tarawa, the line between official regulation and raw improvisation blurred. Aircraft were patched with tin. Engines were fed with spliced ports. And sometimes, men ignored the manuals altogether. That's where this story begins, not in a command room, but in a corner of a hangar, where a Marine named John, known among his squad for fixing the impossible, began to reimagine his aircraft's firepower. He studied the Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 6 of them lined across the wings. Reliable, yes, but their synchronized firing left dead moments between bursts. To him, that was waste. He wanted overlap, a continuous roar. He wanted speed that no enemy could anticipate. No one in command approved such changes. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't safe. But then again, war had already blurred the meaning of safety. And so, with a steady hand and the quiet permission of desperation, he began his modification. What John attempted was not innovation in a lab. It was necessity in a war that punished hesitation. To understand the brilliance of his act, one must first understand what a machine gun meant in the sky. Each Browning M2 fired at roughly 800 rounds per minute. Formidable, but only when firing clean and synchronized. Mounted across a plane's wings, each gun had to align with a point hundreds of meters ahead, converging at an optimal distance. The problem was not in the bullets. It was in the rhythm. Small misfires, delayed triggers, or uneven belts meant that a short burst could spray unevenly, missing its mark entirely. Japanese pilots, especially in the A6M0, thrived on that weakness. Their planes were lighter, faster, and equipped with cannons that tore through metal in seconds. They fought like ghosts, striking and vanishing. American gunners had power, but power needed control. John's modification changed that equation. Instead of standard sequential firing, he rewired the triggers to allow asynchronous cycling, each gun firing a fraction of a second apart, creating what felt like a seamless, continuous beam of bullets. The recoil was heavier, the sound deafening, but the stream of fire became almost uninterrupted. In theory, it was inefficient. It overheated barrels faster, devoured ammunition, and made aiming nearly impossible for the untrained. But in practice, it worked. Dogfights turned faster. Zeros that once danced through American gunfire now shattered mid-turn. The modification didn't make the Wildcat faster or stronger. It made it ruthless. Other pilots noticed. Mechanics whispered about the insane mod. Some tried copying it. Others thought it was suicide. But to those who flew beside John, it wasn't insanity. It was survival, in its purest mechanical form. The mission that cemented the legend came on a pale morning over the Solomon Islands. Clouds hung low, heavy with mist and silence. Below, the dark waters carried the reflection of a war without end. John's Wildcat rose through the gray, its twin rows of Brownings primed and gleaming with oil. He had cleaned and rewired them himself the night before. Methodical, quiet, almost ritualistic. In his logbook, he wrote only one line: "Test the stream." When the Japanese fighters appeared, they came as they always did: swift, coordinated, precise. 6 zeros in formation, banking out of the sun. Their leader dove first, confident in the familiar advantage of speed and climb. But this time, the rhythm in the sky changed. John's thumb pressed the trigger. What followed did not sound like a burst. It sounded like a roar. The air tore apart under a continuous stream of 50 caliber rounds. Tracers stitched the sky into light. The first zero disintegrated before it could roll. The second tried to climb. Its tail caught fire before it cleared the formation. John didn't pause to correct his aim. He simply moved the line of fire like a brush across the horizon. In less than a minute, 3 enemy planes were gone. By the second minute, 2 more. Radio chatter turned to disbelief. 20 Japanese aircraft fell in that single sortie, not by a squadron, but by one man's modification and the machine that obeyed it. When he landed, the barrels of his guns glowed red, the metal warped, the wings trembling from stress. He had done what the manuals forbade, what the engineers denied, and what the war demanded. When the Wildcat rolled to a stop on the airstrip, the smell of scorched metal filled the air. Ground crews rushed forward, not to celebrate, but to make sure the plane hadn't caught fire. The gun barrels had melted slightly, edges blistered like candle wax, and yet they had held. John stepped down in silence. He wasn't smiling. His flight suit was streaked with oil and powder, his hands still trembling from the recoil that had shaken the frame. Around him, mechanics and fellow pilots gathered, drawn not by ceremony, but disbelief. They counted the holes in the fuselage, the empty ammunition belts, and the faint scorch marks running across the wings. Word spread quickly. At first, some dismissed it as rumor. 20 kills in minutes seemed like a myth. But film footage from the escort planes confirmed it. The sky had been shredded by a single continuous burst. Engineers studied the footage frame by frame, tracing each moment to understand how the guns had stayed synchronized under such stress. John's modification was soon replicated in other squadrons, though most attempts failed. Without his exact tuning, the guns jammed, overheated, or tore the wings apart. It wasn't a design that could be mass-produced. It was the work of instinct, of one man who understood his machine like a living thing. The military kept the footage classified for months, unsure how to explain it. The official report reduced it to a simple note: pilot achieved extraordinary success due to unique weapon calibration. But among those who flew beside him, it was something different, a moment when precision met desperation, and human intuition outpaced engineering. In the years that followed, John's story faded quietly into the archives. No medals, no fanfare, just a note in a logbook and a line in a report. But among those who had seen it, who had heard the constant roar of his guns echoing through the clouds, the memory lingered like smoke after battle. It was not merely the act of killing 20 enemies in minutes that defined that day. It was the moment when a single pilot, through intuition and audacity, found a way to stretch the limits of what his machine could do. In an age of mass production and strict regulation, he had done something deeply human. He had improvised. The Wildcat was a product of engineering, but John's weapon was a product of imagination. It wasn't born in a laboratory or authorized by command. It came from necessity, from that fine edge between survival and extinction. And that, perhaps, is what war often reveals, not just destruction, but invention under pressure. The modification would never be repeated successfully. The aircraft that survived those missions were retired, dismantled, their aluminum skins melted down and remade into new machines. Yet in the quiet halls of aviation museums, the name Wildcat still carries a faint echo of that reckless brilliance, of one man's refusal to fly by the manual. War has always been a crucible for innovation. But innovation, when stripped of glory, remains something purer, a testament to the mind's ability to adapt, to imagine, to resist. And so, beneath the thunder of engines and the roar of gunfire, there lies a quieter truth, that sometimes the greatest victories are not born from command, but from curiosity. The kind of curiosity that turns a machine into legend.